الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيد المرسلين نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He protects us from fitnah in all of its forms, the apparent and the hidden. Likewise, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He gives us clarity in the times of confusion and that He makes us steadfast upon His religion until we meet Him. This is another session where we are looking at the book written by Sheikh Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen, or a transcription of a lecture from Muhammad ibn Salih al-Uthaymeen rahimahullah, Mawqif al-Muslim, the stance or the response, the position of the Muslim min al-fitan, with all the different fitnas that they are experiencing in the life of this dunya. And in today's session, the Shaykh is going to talk about another issue which affects the Muslim in the world that we live in today. So he says now, number 3, we've previously looked at the fitna of women, the fitna of wealth, specifically riba last week. Now he is saying number 3, shahwatul farj, the fitna of the private parts. And here particularly he's going to talk about when a man can be easily led to be alone with a woman, or the other way around. The Shaykh is saying here that the means for a person to be alone with the opposite gender have opened up, wa'iyadhu billah, may Allah protect us. And the Shaykh is saying here, this is something which is of a fitna, especially for those people du'afa al-nufus, du'afa al-deen, du'afa al-iffah. They are weak in themselves, they are weak in their religion, and they are weak in their chastity. And with a mixture of those, the Shaykh is saying here, this becomes an ignited fitna that people will find themselves in. Now we have to remember, the Shaykh is talking about a time where there was no social media and technology wasn't as advanced. A phone was literally a landline phone. The Shaykh is saying here, in his time, it's become easy for a man to be alone with a woman. And the example that he's given in Saudi Arabia at that time is that there were influx of maids coming into the country. So they would be basically living alongside another family, and she would be alone without her family, without her father or mahram or anyone like that. So the man of the house could easily find himself alone with one of those maids. And that's what the Shaykh is talking about here. He said that now it's become so easy because that's what people are doing now in Saudi Arabia. Fast forward 20, 30 years, people are alone in the workplace, people are alone. You could be alone with the opposite gender just by you being in your room perhaps, because things have become so easy with video calling, etc. So the Shaykh is saying here, this becomes a fitna if you are weak in yourself, if you're weak in your religion, if you're weak in your chastity. يخلو الشاب بالمرأة الخادمة. A young man can be easily alone with a young woman, and even if she is not extremely attractive or beautiful, something like that, the Shaykh is saying here, this is still a means for the fahisha, may Allah protect us, lewdness, illicit relationships to come about. Even if the man is not initially interested, because of the fact that these things have been made easy and made available, they are now spreading. This is what the Shaykh is saying at that time. And this is one of the greatest fitnas. Now, like what we say here, we live in obviously a different society, and free mixing in the workplace, free mixing in the schools now as well. As early as 10, 11 years old, you can hear stories. The Shaykh is saying here, if the person is not firm in his religion, and he is not firm to control himself, this is going to become a fitna, irrespective of what age you're at. Because of the fact that the Shaykh is saying here, the vices have been made easy because people are alone with one another. And don't think, the Shaykh is saying now here, فَلَا تَظُنُّ أنه إذا يسر لك أن تفعل فاحشة في هذه المرأة فيعني ذلك أنه ينتفي عنك الإثم بل قد يكون إثمك أعظم. Don't think that if a person can get away with it, if things are easy for him to do, that he has gotten away with the sin and nobody knows about it. The Shaykh is saying here, no, don't think like that. In actual fact, it could even mean that the sin is greater. And this is a brief introduction. Now the Shaykh is going to give us some evidences from the Quran and the Sunnah to highlight why this is such a fitnah. So one of the examples that he gets is from the Quran, is the story of Yusuf alayhi salam. Yusuf alayhi salam, like we've said before, it could be the man is tempted, it could be that the woman is tempted, and this is how we have an example here. Yusuf alayhi salam, a Nabi. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Yusuf describes him as a muhsin in more than one place. Muhsin is a person who's constantly doing good deeds and aware of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Shaykh says here, Da'at Imra al-Aziz ila nafsiha. He is just doing his thing. She was tempted by him. He was protecting himself, he was protecting his chastity, he was protecting his religion, he was firm. Unlike what he said in the beginning, if a person is not firm, if a person doesn't know his religion, if a person is weak in his desires, etc. But Yusuf had those things. But despite that, there was a few moments where she was seeing herself being alone with him until وراودته التي هو في بيتها عن نفسه وغلقت الأبواب وقالت هيت لك. She saw the opportunity, she locked the doors and she said, come to me. The Shaykh is saying here, this is a fitnah inside of the house, and this is a woman of stature and nobility and lineage and perhaps even beauty, and she closed the doors so nobody is looking. And now the situation has been perfectly set up in the wrong way, if we can use it like that. The situation has become so bad that everything has been thought of by her and the operation is now complete. And the Shaykh is now saying here, this is a complete seclusion between man and woman alone, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَرَوَتْ عَنْ نَفْسِهَا وَغَلَّقَتْ الْبَابَ, and she closed the doors, there's no one there. So what does this man say? A man of Iman, a man of Taqwa. He says, قَالَ مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ. He stopped himself, and this is what the Shaykh is saying here. In this fitnah, you need to be firm in your religion, and you need to be firm in who you are in your relationship with Allah and His religion. You need to be able to control your desires. And to be honest, this point can be said about all the different fitan, but specifically this one the Shaykh is mentioning because of the fact that we have an example, Yusuf alayhi salam. قَالَ مَعَاذَ اللَّهِ. He stood up to her and she said, no, I'm not going to do that. And he remembered Allah. And he was prevented. And this is an example from the Quran. Now we have an example from the Sunnah. Hadith Bukhari and Muslim. The Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam describes the Day of Judgment, and he says that this is a day that there will be no shade except for the shade of Allah. And underneath that shade there will be 7 categories of people. And one of those categories is a man, Da'atu Imra, Da'atu Mansabin wa Jamal. She's a woman of status, she's a woman of beauty, and she called him to her, and he said, Inni akhafu Allah. The Shaykh is saying here, look at this now. The only thing that prevented him was the fear of Allah. Because nobody else knows. The doors are closed, everything is secluded, the curtains are drawn, phones are off, everything is... The only thing that prevented him from being alone, from falling into this fitnah, Inni akhaf Allah. And this is the precise point that the Shaykh is making here. In order to preserve yourself from this fitnah and any other fitnah, you need to have a fear of Allah. What does it mean to have a fear of Allah? The fear of Allah has different gradings for the believer. Just like your iman goes up and down, the fear of Allah can be higher for some people than others. So you have something which is known as rahbah, and then you have something which is known as khawf, and you have something which is known as khashya. Rahbah is when a person fears the consequences in the akhirah. So he prevents himself and he thinks Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not be pleased with this action in the akhirah. Khawf starts now and it can continue into the future. But the thing is, with khawf, linguistically, it could be something which is not an act of worship. In the Arabic language, if you're scared of spiders, if you're scared of something, the dark or whatever, I am scared of the dark, and you use the word khawf. That is a khawf which is, as the ulama have said, something which is natural and tabi'i. And you might not necessarily be doing an act of worship with that. But the khawf of Allah now becomes an act of worship which is internal, where you have the fear right now, in the present, and perhaps in the future. And the highest level of a fear of Allah that a person could have is khashya. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Quran, إِنَّمَا يَخْشَى اللَّهَ مِنْ عِبَادِهِ الْعُلَمَاء. Those who fear Allah the most are the ulama. Why does Allah use the word khashya here alongside the ulama? Now, ulama here doesn't necessarily refer to scholars who have studied for a long period of time. Anyone who's got knowledge, and that knowledge brings about fear, you are included in that ayah. You are included from the ulama in that ayah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has revealed the Quran for every single one of us, not just for an elite group of people. Therefore, if the Quran has come to you and that's created fear based on knowledge, this is the highest level of khawf or fear that a person can have, and this is known as khashya. The Shaykh is saying here, this person finds himself underneath the Arsh of Ar-Rahman, protected alongside the Anbiya and the Rusul. And we know from the events Yawm al-Qiyamah, they will then be led to go to drink from the pool of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. The cups of that pool will be like the stars in the sky. This is the description that the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam gave. Two possible meanings here: plenty in number, like the stars in the sky, but also beautiful, sparkling, like the stars in the sky. These people will drink from that. They'll go underneath the Arsh al-Rahman, and then they'll go speak to Adam, and they'll say, Ya Adam, you are Father. Allah created with your own two hands. With his own two hands. Ask Allah to commence the Day of Judgment. Adam will say, no, not me. I sinned. He'll be scared on that day. Go to Nuh. Then they will go to Nuh. Nuh will make a mistake. Alayhim salam jami'an. Then they will say, go to Ibrahim. Ibrahim will say, no, I lied. Ibrahim will say, not me. So go to Musa, go to Isa. These are the people who will be underneath the Arsh al-Rahman. Where's the rest of creation? Outside, with the sun suspended on top of their heads. The Shaykh is saying here, this person says, Inni akhaf Allah, I have a fear of Allah, and it stops him from fitnah. This person will be underneath the Arsh al-Rahman on a day, Yawma yudhilluhu Allah, fi dhillihi yawma la dhilla illa dhillah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will shade them on a day when there will be no shade except the shade of Allah, meaning the Arsh of Ar-Rahman. The Shaykh goes on. The Messenger of Allah says that this man is from a category, from the seven, and this is one of those categories, that through the rahmah of Allah, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will reward him on the Day of Judgment before his entering into Jannah, because of the fact that he stayed away from fitnah. What fitnah did he stay away from? The Messenger of Allah said, Da'athu imra. The woman called him. She was chasing him, not the other way around. Point number one. That mansib. She was of a person of a high status. Wa jamal. Characteristic 1, 2, 3. Despite that, he says, what does he say? Inni khafullah. Surely, I fear Allah. And he protects himself from fitnah. So the Shaykh says this is a fitnah which has so many different outlets for you to attain that fitnah. And this is what he says in the conclusion of the point that he is making. Had he been alive today, Allah knows best what he would have said. He is saying good 20, 30 years ago that a man can find himself in his fitnah very easily. Now we need to understand something here now. A person might look at this and they will think, okay, I understand what the religion says, I understand what the Shaykh is saying here, so I'm going to completely cut off any kind of communication or interaction with the opposite gender. That's not what Islam is saying. The companions, male, used to trade with females. The companion, male, used to visit females when they were not feeling well. The companion, males, they used to be at service to widows, etc. Therefore, there are guidelines. And what the Shaykh is saying here, if those guidelines are breached, that's when it becomes a fitnah. And from the biggest guidelines which can be breached is when a man is alone with a woman with no real purpose. And then the Shaykh is saying here, as we know from a hadith of the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he said that this is not permissible, and if a man is alone with a woman, then the shaitan is the third one. But there are certain scenarios, obviously we live in a non-Muslim country, there are certain scenarios a man has to be alone with a woman. What do we do about that? This is known as khalwa, when a man is alone with a woman. The ulama have explained, if we can have a man and a woman, or a third party that is going to be present, then there is no more khalwa. So I'll give you an example. A woman needs to speak to a brother for a particular reason, whatever it might be. How do they cooperate? Number one, it has to be within guidelines and etiquettes, lowering of the gaze, not being excessive beyond what is necessary. And if they do need to meet, or the brother goes to a particular place, or she goes to a shop or something like that, if there are more than one person there, then it is fine. Because this is not khalwa anymore. A woman, she needs to take a taxi. She's alone with the taxi driver. If there is no necessity involved, then this is not allowed. But if there is a necessity, then it becomes permissible. But if she can have someone come with her, this is not khalwa anymore. The point that we're making here is, man and woman alone together, this should not happen. And the way that we can remove that is if we have more than one person there. And this is the same thing what we find in schools and in the workplace. You might be working alongside women. I mean, this is not permissible, but we obviously have to be practical as well, and understand that this is what Muslims have to live with sometimes, until they can find something maybe which is completely, segregated in the role that they have. So in the meantime, what we'll say to that brother is to try and find another job, but do not be alone with the opposite gender. And if you have to work alongside the opposite gender, make sure that there is someone there alongside with you. This is the point that we're making. Khalwa can be removed if a person has someone there alongside with them. What are the guidelines then if they have to communicate with the opposite gender? Like we said, lowering the gaze, not speaking beyond what is necessary, and keeping it within Islamic etiquettes and boundaries. The Shaykh is saying here, فَإِيَّاكَ أَن تَفْتِنَ إِذَا تَيَسَّرْتَ لَكَ أَسْبَابُ الْمَعْصِيَةِ. Be careful, because when you have fitnah, especially a fitnah like this, it becomes very easy for those fitnah to spread, and the means for that sin becomes very easy and easily accessible. فإن ذلك من الفتن العظيمة التي هي في الحقيقة تمحيص للإنسان. The Shaykh is saying here, this is one of those fitan, which is a great fitna, which tests the believer. هل هو مؤمن حقا أو هو مؤمن نفاقا? Is he a believer, firm upon his religion, a believer who is true, or is he a believer but not really a believer that has hypocrisy inside of him? Nas'al Allah salama. The Shaykh ends by asking for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala salama and His protection. We ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He keeps us firm upon the correct path, and He gives us tawfiq to establish what is beloved to Him. Likewise, we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He protects us from fitnah in all of its forms, and that He brings about ease and salvation for all of those who are struggling in the different fitn that we are experiencing in the world today. Allahu a'lam. Sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in. The next one, he is saying here, fitnah that a person can experience in regards to his religion. And that inshallah we'll be covering next week. Subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, ashhadu an la ilaha illa ant, astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk. Barakallahu feekum. Yes.
What I wanted to ask was, just as the solution to it has been mentioned about speaking to the opposite gender in a certain way,
Yeah.
to a certain degree only. Is there something called as the hijab of the voice, something that in the sunnah?
Okay, so the question is asking here, if the woman needs to speak to the opposite gender, is there something which is known as the hijab of the voice? Some of the ulama have said that the woman's voice is awrah, and she should not speak to the opposite gender unless if there is a necessity. The correct opinion is that the voice of the woman is not awrah. However, if she is going to speak to the opposite gender, she should not beautify her voice. So from the guidelines which would apply to the sisters, more than obviously here we're speaking to the brothers, and there are different guidelines that you would need to go through in more detail, which we haven't given in the class. But one of those is that, even perhaps for the brothers we can say this, is that he shouldn't, or she shouldn't, both genders should not be speaking in a manner that will stir emotions in the other person. And that is the point. So if she's speaking in a soft manner or he's speaking in a particular manner, it should be done within proper etiquettes and guidelines. Barakallahu feekum.